Now we're going to move into our first session. So I'm going to have the distinct pleasure of telling you a little bit about our first fireside chat with a very prolific founder. Her name is Daphne Koller. I'm going to read to you a quote that we found from her. She said the following. Daphne Koller, the co-founder of Coursera, said, "We should spend less time in universities filling our students' minds with content by lecturing them, and more time igniting their creativity by actually talking with them." If you think about that, that's, you think it kind of makes sense, but it's not what's happening in the real world, right, in the real classroom. So I'm excited to present Daphne to you. She's a third-generation Israeli-American PhD who's passionate about education, obviously. She's a Stanford professor and is excited to make the college experience available to anyone through Coursera. What else do we have here? So she's at Stanford. She's at the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. She's a computer scientist who studies how to model large, complicated decisions with lots of uncertainty, which I'm sure makes her a really good founder because startups are very uncertain. So with that, I'd like to bring Daphne to the stage. I should sit before you come. Welcome. Have a seat. So we're in this huge, I'm going to sit closer to you, or you can come sit closer to me. Yeah, right?
Okay.
So we thought, okay, you're going to sit back? Okay. This is so awkward, I swear. Okay, I'm going to sort of sit like this. Do I look all right? Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you,
We're so happy to have you here.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're excited.
Hi,
so, yeah, this is so awesome. So let's sort of talk about your work in EdTech, and this industry didn't exist too long ago. I mean, education has been basically it's a nonprofit endeavor in many ways. So, but it's blowing up right now. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about why EdTech is blowing up. What's going on?
Well, I think there is a number of societal factors that are really driving the massive transformation that we're seeing right now. And some of them are simply the fact that it's very difficult and increasingly more difficult day by day to do well in life without having access to a high quality education. It's becoming much harder to build a better life for you and your family without that. And yet at the same time, the access to education is becoming increasingly difficult, both in terms of the cost of education in countries like the United States, and at the same time, in other parts of the world, specifically the developing world, the capacity to provide high quality education to the people there just doesn't exist and will probably not exist within a generation unless we do things completely differently than the way that we're doing now.
So if that's the case, you're talking about the fact that we need to bring education to other markets. Mm-hmm. Access has been difficult. How does that become a business?
Well, I think that's, for us, it's first and foremost a mission, and a business it needs to be as part of that, is an enabling factor to make that happen. But there's a number of ways in which one could make it a business. The model that we've elected to pursue is one that preserves the access to the actual education free to everyone anywhere, so that people who don't even have a dollar, or far less a credit card, are nevertheless able to get that access. And so how do you then find enough money to pay for it? Well, you choose to use a freemium model, as it's called in Silicon Valley jargon, which has the people who elect to opt into value-added services that provide them with tangible benefit. They're the ones that help pay for the others. So the one that we're currently using is basically credentialing, and if you earn a nice official credential that you can then use potentially to get access to better employment, that is something that brings you tangible value and you elect to pay for, and that helps pay for everybody else.
So if that's sort of the sort of, you've taken the freemium startup model and brought it to education.
Yeah.
So what's the impact of that? Does that mean you're trying to basically replace existing universities?
No, we are most definitely not trying to replace existing universities. In fact, we partner with many universities with the goal of transforming the educational experience that they provide to their on-campus students in something that uses technology in a much more fundamental way to provide a better learning experience. The audience that we're reaching using this free open educational offering are basically new markets of people that are currently the unserved, the non-consumers, as Clay Christensen calls them. And those are two main markets right now. The first is the one that I alluded to earlier, which are all those people in Africa or India or Bangladesh who currently don't have and will never in their lifetime in the current setting have access to a high quality education because there just are not enough qualified instructors in those countries. Right. The second unserved market, and by the way, 40% of our students are in the developing world, so that's a very large fraction.
That's amazing.
And only 30% are in the United States.
Wow.
The second large market that we're serving are people who are like many of us in the room, finished our education 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, realizing that what we learned in college is only marginally relevant to the jobs that we have or would like to have. And then how do we learn something new? For many of us, we have jobs and families and mortgages, and we're not able to say, oh, I'm going to take 2 years off and go back to school and get a master's degree or an MBA or something that will allow me to enhance my career, make a career change. And those people are currently an unserved market because the educational opportunities that are available to them are not readily engaged with in their current lifestyle.
Interesting. So let's talk about the 40% people who are accessing Coursera in emerging markets. Yeah. In those markets, most people are accessing the internet through their phones, and you have a very strong mobile strategy. Yeah. When you decide to go into those markets and use the mobile phone as the primary entry point to Coursera, are there challenges that you face that you didn't expect? And in general, what were the challenges to build such a product that talks to this 40% of your market, but really majority of the world?
So I would expect, I mean, realistically, that right now the 40% that we're reaching are the early adopters, many of whom, not all of whom, but many of whom also have desktop access in their workplaces or whatever. But I think for us, it's a critical component of our mission to reach out to those that don't have that access. And for that reason, we've taken both the very aggressive mobile strategy that you mentioned. We launched an iOS app just before Christmas. Android's coming up real soon. And for us, and Android, of course, is for the emerging markets, the dominant platform. And that's a critical component for us in reaching out to this population. The other component of our international strategy is also internationalization of both the platform and the content. So this started out back in October when we launched our first internationalized platform in China. Since then, we have, I think, 8 of our major languages in an internationalized platform and have multiple partnerships with organizations that help with the translation of the content in terms of the subtitles on the educational videos so that people whose native language is not English can still benefit from having access to the content. And this is a critical thing for us.
Were there things that happened in those markets that you didn't think would happen when people were using Coursera, or was it just straightforward, everyone loved it?
I think there's always challenges in teaching to a very broad international market in that there's cultural sensitivities that occur in one country that might not occur in the United States. And I think this has primarily been a challenge for some of our instructors where, their baseball analogies don't go over really well in other parts of the world. And,
Neither in Canada, by the way.
Well, maybe so
Hockey,
as well.
Please.
And so I think there's a really interesting educational process for an instructor to teach to that kind of market. And at the same time, there's also incredible rewards because we hear from many of our instructors, especially those that teach courses that have a heavy contextual element like sustainability or sociology or business or medicine, where there's a very different set of responses that you get from teaching that content. Think about a sustainability and environment class. The response you get from somebody in Beijing is very different from one that you would get in Toronto or one that you would get in Abuja, Nigeria. And so you get a huge spectrum of opinions that is very valuable both to the instructors as well as to the population of students taking the course.
Interesting. So in these emerging markets, clearly I'm fascinated by this. You're expecting that you're giving it to them free. The people that fund the sort of their education are the people here in the West. When we talk about the impact that education has in emerging markets. I mean, education, we think, is probably the gateway to economic change. If that's true, and you first tell me if that is true, and if that is true, how long will it take for your company to have an impact on these economies?
Okay, so first I'd like to correct one important component of what you said. While a good fraction of our universities are in the West, we also have universities that are providing content within those emerging markets. For example, we have 3 Russian universities right now teaching in Russian. We have a number of Chinese universities. And so we're actually looking actively to add universities. We have 2 Mexican universities, the top 2 Mexican universities teaching courses in Spanish. So I think there is a real, I mean, we want the content development effort not to be something that, you know, the West is teaching, the, you know, everybody else. Because I think it's important. To the rest of your question, I think it's undoubtedly the case that education is the gateway to not just economic change, but also to societal change. I mean, if you think about many of the problems that plague many of these developing economies, not just things like unemployment, but also malnutrition, infant mortality, overpopulation, AIDS, extremism, all of these problems, when you look and you stratify by education, the problems go away as the population becomes more and more educated. And so this is a fundamental force for positive change in the world, is to provide people with access to education. And so I think there is I mean, it's a moral imperative on all of us to try and provide education to everyone who wants it, because I think all of the world will benefit from having that happen. Now, how long is it going to take for that to happen? Yeah, I mean, clearly it's a process, and I'm not sure we'll ever be done, because there's always more people that can be educated or better educated. But I think that every little bit helps. And so let me tell you one example, one of my favorite stories. I think one that will resonate especially with this audience. So the largest MOOC ever, massive open online course ever taught on our platform, is by an instructor called Scott Plouse from Wesleyan University. It had 250,000 people in it. Scott Plouse, I mean, as you know, Wesleyan is a small liberal arts college. He typically teaches a class of, I don't know, maybe 12 to 15 people. But here he reached 250,000. His final project was something called the Day of Compassion, where the students were supposed, a social psychology class, the students were supposed to live 24 hours compassionately and then write up their experiences and analyze it using the techniques taught in the class. He had thousands of submissions. Over 700 got a perfect score on that assignment. The top-ranked one ended up getting a trip to Stanford to meet the Dalai Lama. But let me tell you about that one. She's a physician from India who decided, as her Day of Compassion, to do something about the problem of sexual violence against girls and women in India, a very pervasive problem. She went to a local school that had 2,000 girls from lower and middle income families, talked to them about the problem of sexual violence, identified dozens of cases of girls that had been subjected to sexual violence by teachers, neighbors, family members, and so on, is now offering them pro bono consulting in her clinic and expanding this out to several other schools in her neighborhood. Now, think about the impact. Scott Plouse typically teaches 12 to 15 people on his on-campus course. Taught 250,000. Thousands of projects where people lived that day compassionately. 700 got a perfect score. One of those touched the lives of hundreds of Indian girls. So when you think about the impact of one of these, what education can achieve, think about that multiplying effect.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but what excites you the most about the work that you're doing? Is it this kind of, social change, or is it something else?
I think it is the transformative effect that we can have on the lives of individual people who are given access to education, and the effect that they in turn then have on their families, and their communities. And I think that's such a hugely important thing that we're able to do that with the participation of our universities, of course.
I'm really proud of you. That's really exciting. So there are some countries that really could benefit from your services. Mm-hmm. They call them services because, after all, this is a company. But because of political reasons, such as I think it's Cuba and Iran, you've had to stop offering classes. Talk to us about that, and is there a way out?
So first of all, I think the answer is the word is not stop, but rather pause.
Pause, okay.
And we're working very actively with the State Department and with OFAC to try and get licenses to be able to offer, to reopen access to these courses as quickly as possible. This is, I will say that the U.S. State Department has been incredibly proactive and cooperative in working with us to get those licenses so that we can circumvent the economic sanctions against these countries. And I'm very hopeful that these will be resolved very soon.
It's exciting, yeah. I mean, it's good that you got some people in there for a few minutes.
No, we have as some of you might know already, we have a partnership with the U.S. State Department around an effort that we call Learning Hubs. It's an effort by which the U.S. State Department is using space in its embassies around the world to provide access to people in the local communities with access to both high-speed internet, computing equipment, as well as a local facilitator who is an embassy employee or sometimes a Fulbright scholar who returned to that home country, and basically setting up a facilitated study group for some courses that are particularly of interest in that local community. And we've seen tremendous success in terms of the results in these facilitated courses in terms of retention and the satisfaction of the students involved. And so I think that the U.S. State Department is interested in exploring these open courses as a way of really having, again, a broad multiplier effect in terms of access, in terms of what foreign policy that the U.S. can engage with abroad, and how can that have a positive impact on local society.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So let's switch over and talk a little bit about running this like a startup, right? At the end of the day, it's a business, it's online, it's technology, and you guys have succeeded from that perspective in that in 4 months of starting the company, you had 1 million users, and then apparently in October of last year, 5.3 million users. So let's talk about...
And 6.5 today.
And now 6.5 today. Okay, so we're growing and growing and growing. Well, these are all founders in the room, or many of them are, or they work at a startup, or they work at a tech company. What are some tactics you use to get that many users?
Offer people something that gives them real value, I think is the most important component of this. All of our growth has been organic.
Wow.
I mean, we have no marketing budgets to speak of. I mean, we do not advertise. Everything is either, well, the somewhat ridiculous media attention that we've gotten, but I think it's because we offer something of significant value, and then everything else is organic, word of mouth. And I think that when you provide something that has significant value, people will find you.
So do you think that people knew they needed this sort of in their life? Or did you discover this and offer to them and they said, oh, I didn't know I needed to learn, for example?
I think that many people had a craving for education, that they kind of like an itch that they tried to scratch in other ways and didn't, maybe found it somewhat satisfying, but not as satisfying. But I think the extent of the demand was definitely a surprise to us. When we launched as part of the initial Stanford effort back in the fall of 2011, the first 3 of these massive open online courses, we were expecting maybe a few thousand people to enroll in each of them. And yet within a matter of weeks, each of them had an enrollment of 100,000 students or more. And when you look at that and you say, wow, there's a real need for this kind of education. And I think that it was that observation, as well as what we talked about earlier, the clear impact that this could have in terms of transforming people's lives, that led us to realize that you couldn't just drop this and go back to our research and forget about it, because the opportunity for massive change was just too great.
So does that tie into the changing customer, right? So there's many people who have basically grown up online or connected. Even in the emerging markets, they have a phone, which they didn't have 10 years ago. Are people's sort of traits of how they learn, have those evolved, and is that what you're benefiting from?
I think that's definitely a part of it. I think that if you go back 10 10 years and think about people's mindsets back then, the notion of getting content from a consumer, from a computer, far less social interaction from a computer was kind of strange. Remember, this was the days prior to YouTube, prior to Facebook, and now the notion of, I'm gonna get a lot of my knowledge from a computer, and a lot of my social interaction is going to come via digital media as sort of part of the daily norms, and I think that's a critical piece to the adoption of this technology.
So if that's the case, so I'm thinking back to my days when I was in school. Which
ancient history.
Ancient history, more than a decade ago. And I'm talking about college.
My kids think that I rode a dinosaur to school, so
we used to make a joke that we would walk to school in the snow uphill both ways.
Yes, exactly.
I never understood that, but anyway, apparently we did that. So in my day and in your day, going to school was about playing in the playground and learning what it was like to get your face shoved into the snow because I was getting bullied, or what it was like to actually corral a group of people and play tag, or in high school it was about the boy you had a crush on, or it was also about learning from a teacher who you really, really admired. And everything I just mentioned is about human interaction, right? There's things that go on in the classroom, whether it's the social side, or in the classroom with the teacher, or even in that group work. In the college that I went to, 50% of more than 60% of my grade was based on what I said in class and what group work I produced. And so I feel I learned a lot, particularly in college, in that high intense environment where everything was about the interaction and less so about writing a test or studying by myself. So if that is part of the educational process, is that now dead because of the internet and social networking? Or, is there still room for it in the model that you have?
Well, I mean, it's an intrinsic part of the model that we have in at least two ways. First of all, I think one of the things that distinguishes this generation of online learning from many of the previous attempts is that this is a social experience. That is, students don't just sit there in front of the computer interacting with the content. They do that, but they also interact with others. And when they get confused about something, they post a question on the discussion forum or enter a hangout with somebody else. And in many cases, especially with such a broad worldwide audience that spans every time zone, they often get an answer to their question much faster than they would get from an instructor who might get around to answer it in a couple days. And so there's the peer grading process, which actually is more interesting, not just because of the scalability of allowing open-ended work to be graded at scale by having students provide feedback to other students, but we find that students learn more from the interaction with each other regarding understanding how other people approach the same problem than they did just by doing the work on their own. So that's one piece of it, is just the social component in the online experience. And then of course we see that people do still want to have a physical face-to-face interaction, which is why we have all these study groups that form, the learning hubs, and it gives people kind of a nexus around which they can assemble and have an interesting conversation with people who share similar interests with them, in this case in education.
So this is happening in person?
Oh, it's happening, yes, absolutely. And some of them are happening in person, some of them are happening online, some of them are hybrids. Okay,
so at the end of the day, you're really could be a hybrid online, offline educational company.
It is, and that's exactly why the learning hubs have been formed.
Okay, good, because I like to go see the cute guy in class.
I will make a note of that.
Excellent, good. Keeping my needs in mind. So let's talk about your role as a founder. I mean, you're an academic, and that's so admirable to be a PhD holder, teaching at Stanford in a really prestigious class that we know of. But running a company is totally different.
Yes.
So let's talk about your duality. Are you a Gemini?
No.
Okay, I am. Right? Go Geminis. We can do many things. Just
I can
checking.
see that.
Yeah. So tell me about your dual life.
Well, I mean, it's a serial duality in the sense that I'm currently on leave from Stanford because it's, I'm sure from all of you here who are founders, that it's a more than full-time job. And for those of you who have families, that too is a full-time job. And then, holding two full-time jobs is hard enough. 3 is out of the question. So, and so I think that I needed to make a transition. And so for the moment, I'm on leave from Stanford doing this. It is a very different experience than being an academic. I mean, as an academic, you're more of a guide and a mentor. You kind of have PhD students who are super smart, or undergraduate students who are super smart. They come in, they have their own direction. You kind of nudge them. Sometimes you give them, an interesting problem to think about and tackle, and they just follow their path.
They obey.
No, they don't obey. That's the whole point. They have their path to follow, and you just give them some ideas on what interesting directions might be. And with a company, everyone has to sort of go in the same direction towards a shared goal. And so you need a lot more coordination and a lot more shared mission without at the same time becoming too prescriptive about, okay, you do this and you do that and you do this, which really stifles creativity in the organization. So you have to be really careful about how you steer the ship in the same direction while still letting people innovate and explore.
So you're balancing creativity and chaos.
Yes.
So how has that transition been for you? What do you think you were able to transfer from your experience in the classroom to the startup, if any, or not?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, the very fact that what we're doing at Coursera is an educational mission. I mean, that really aligns with all of the experience that I've had teaching in the classroom for, over 15 years. I mean, what do students care about? What are good educational experiences for them? What do instructors care about? How do you best support their efforts to provide a good education to their students? I mean, that understanding of both teaching and of the university ecosystem in general was absolutely critical, I think, both to our success and also to our credibility. And then the other part is, I mean, you do, as an academic, try and produce something where the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts in terms of the research and providing students an opportunity to participate and collaborate towards some kind of higher level goal. And so that certainly also was something that transferred over.
Fantastic. So I think yesterday when we were talking to Jessica Livingston of YC, Y Combinator, she said, one of the traits that successful founders have is they have domain expertise. So this is your domain expertise.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Okay, we're going to turn it over to the audience for questions. Oh my God, hands are rising. Okay, the first one I saw go up is right at the back there with the black. Yeah.
Hi, Daphne. I just wanted to say shalom, because I think we're the only two Israelis in the room.
No, I doubt it. There's definitely more.
Okay. My question to you is, I know that you left your job at Stanford, but did you notice any change in your teaching style as you sort of were developing this technology and thinking about it? Or if you were going to go back, or hopefully maybe you will go back, how would you change?
Okay, so first of all, I'm on leave, so I haven't left my position. It's a leave of absence. And a lot of the ideas that ended up sort of being a key part of the Coursera experience were ones that I actually developed in teaching at Stanford when I realized about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago now, that the notion of a lecture was really a very poor way of teaching people. I mean, just putting 150 people in an auditorium and lecturing at them for an hour and a half just wasn't a very good experience, and that's not where they learned. And so the idea of basically what's called now flipping the classroom, where the delivery of the basic content and teaching people basic skills happens outside the classroom, so that in class you could actually engage with the students, talk to them, teach them all those higher level cognitive skills of how do you take an ill-formed problem and really formulate it so that you can tackle it using the tools that we teach them in class. How do you convince the person sitting next to you that your idea is a good one? How do you present your results to a group? All of these important skills were not ones that we were doing a really good job teaching. And so this notion of flipping the classroom was a driving force in developing a lot of the technology that eventually gave rise to Coursera.
Fantastic. All right. Oh my gosh, there's so many questions. I'll let the mic runner pick who's the one right there. Yeah, the question right next to you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Anna. I wanted to ask a question about the other vital aspect of what makes Coursera possible, which is partnerships with the universities. So there's still a number of universities that have not made the step towards joining you guys, and I mean top universities. What are some of the challenges that you guys face, and what do you offer such top institutions so that they don't see this as much of a threat and more as an interesting challenge to join? I don't know. Thanks.
So first of all, let me say that most universities, certainly the better ones, don't really view this as a threat, because I think an institution like, you know, Princeton or Yale, they're going to be around for the long haul, and I don't think they're threatened in any way by us. Many of them just use this as an opportunity to reach out to a much broader audience than they have ever been able to reach out to, an opportunity to transform the way they educate their own students by leveraging technology in ways that would be difficult for them to do on their own. So I think that this is something that is incredibly appealing to a lot of universities as well as to instructors, which is why we've had the rate of adoption that we had, which, by the way, to me was a surprise. If you'd asked me 2 years ago when we started back in January of 2012, how many university partners we would have within 2 years, I would have said, 15 to 20. And here we have 108 with more in the pipeline. Now, not every university is on board, certainly, and one of the things that I discovered as part of this ongoing process is that each university is different. I used to think that, you know, Yale, Princeton, Harvard, they're all kind of the same, and they aren't. They're really different, distinct institutions in how they perceive the world, and not everyone necessarily wants or needs to be part of this, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, go ahead, right here in the front. Yeah.
Hi. I'll start by saying I'm a polyglot, and I have studied in 3 different countries, actually 4. And that was a challenge for me because I was born in Venezuela. My family immigrated to the US, and I wanted to study languages, which I've criticized my whole life because I feel that the best way to learn is by traveling and having an immersion kind of experience. So I wonder, you know, and I ended up going back to Venezuela to get an equivalence for my high school diploma, to then study German in France, and then I interned in Berlin. But I just wonder if there is an opportunity to help people make equivalences and help them cross borders. If you see that, or what the challenges might be in helping people learn languages remotely.
Okay, so let me answer 2 parts to your question. First of all, in terms of crossing borders, I think that actually is one of the more exciting aspects of what's going on. And I mentioned the broad worldwide audience and the sustainability answers being very different in Beijing and in Abuja. And I think one of the things that we're also seeing is that this crossing of boundaries helps people break down mental barriers in terms of their perception of people from other countries and other cultures, including ones that they have often been traditional enemies to. And we've seen multiple examples of people telling, well, you know, I always thought these were really bad guys, but now that I've interacted with them in this sort of fairly neutral domain and around this fairly neutral content, I realize that they're okay. And I think that does help break down barriers. Now, in terms of teaching languages, you know, I think there's a lot to be done in terms of teaching languages online, and it's just something that hasn't happened on our platform yet, but I think it's definitely something that could and probably will eventually be done. So.
Interesting, great. Yeah, keep those couple here.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. So my background's in education, and I'm curious how you are utilizing all of the educational research around MOOCs and involving you know, your staff in educational research on your success rates, on you know, learning technologies, and just, you know, advancing through research. What sort of structures do you have in place to do that?
So I think one of the big opportunities that we have open to us is the remarkable data set that's being collected around human learning as part of this effort. Because speaking as an instructor, I can tell you that the visibility that I've had into how my own students learn has been minimal as a Stanford instructor. You have the midterm and the final, and you kind of see, oh shoot, I didn't teach that topic really well because nobody got that question right. Here, because everything is very finely instrumented, and you get that data at the scale of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of students, we have the opportunity to turn the study of human learning in general and of the success of specific courses and specific items within the courses into a data science, which is a transformation that's been hugely revolutionary in biology and astronomy and various other medicine, various other disciplines. And so I think that there's a real opportunity, amazing opportunity for us to basically transform the study of human learning. A number of our university partners have already started to engage in very in-depth research projects on the data from their own courses. We've done some research at Coursera, probably not nearly as much as one could, simply because, you know, we're a very small organization. We're hunkered in the trenches building a product that people can benefit from. And as we grow, I'm sure, as has happened in other companies, there's been more of the longer term research gets done. But right now we're sort of, let's build this and get the benefit to as many people as possible.
I'm Nahid. So I'm a hardware enthusiast and I'm working on my own startup right now. So one of the challenge I have found is like, suppose you need to learn Python or something. You can go and find them online quickly. But if you want to learn like, okay, PCB design or more of hardware-ish physical stuff like Arduino and all those things. I mean, Arduino is easier nowadays, but so those, like in those areas, like do Coursera has any plan expanding in those areas?
You mean things that involve hardware?
Yeah, more physical stuff.
So, so let me expand the question just a little bit. So first of all, let me say that there's been a number of attempts that are actually ongoing on the platform right now, where an instructor says, I teach a course that requires hardware, and so I'm going to basically partner with a company and people can order a small, cheap hardware kit to be shipped to them so that they can do something like a circuit, build a circuit or something. And I think that's one possible way to go about doing that. Of course, that makes the course no longer free, because once you're shipping somebody a hardware kit, then they have, you know, somebody needs to pay for that hardware, right? The marginal cost is no longer that close to zero. The other answer to your question is that our instructors have been remarkably creative in thinking outside the box in terms of how to deal with courses that require physical experiences. So one of my favorite classes is from Georgia Tech called Introductory Physics with Laboratory. And the question is, how do you do a physics lab class when the most of your students don't have access to a lab? And so the instructor had the students do the experiments in the wild with balls and tables and things like that. And then in order to assess whether they did the work correctly, he had them videotape the experiments from their phone and wrote image processing software to track the balls so that he can compute the velocities and accelerations and then tell the students whether they did the work correctly or not. And so this is a physical experiment that is nevertheless something that students are able to do in the wild and can do it for free by the very creative process of the instructor who put the class together. And so I think one of the big things that we're seeing in this new modality is it really inspires creativity on the part of both instructors and students.
Oh, this has been incredible. I'm really, really excited to see how technology and entrepreneurship can enter such a society-changing part of our lives. Daphne, this has been a great discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.